The Call is a Korean sci-fi movie about a phone that allows a woman in 2019 to communicate with a girl who previously lived in the same house in 1999. This one continuously shakes up its premise with new ideas, so we're pretty excited to dive in and talk about it. Welcome everyone to the Atomic Cinema Experiment. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
I come in peace.
This is a science fiction movie podcast. We get together and talk about sci-fi movie. It's that simple. And recently we've been trying to discover some of the movies we missed, some sci-fi movies from this past few years, this decade so far, that have slipped under the radar. And the movie we're doing today is one of those movies. It is called The Call from 2020, specifically the South Korean movie called The Call from 2020, because there is also an American movie starring Tobin Bell, which has nothing to do with what we're talking about today.
It's such a generic title, which just only does it a disservice in trying to track down what the hell this movie actually is.
I mean, it's a fine title for what it is. Like, having watched the movie, I can't really fault that the title fits what's happening.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's absolutely... But this director, it's funny, I was looking up this director's stuff. So, Chung-hyun Lee, who's the director of this, he has a movie from 2023 called Ballerina, which has nothing to do with the John Wick spin-off that's coming out, but it just made me laugh that he has another movie that's named the same as an American movie that's going to be out soon.
It strikes me like, obviously it's not, because these actually have some level of craft behind them, but it strikes me the same way that Asylum just tries to cash in on like namings of movies that are coming out at the same time.
Yeah, I don't think it's that, but no. It's weird. Interestingly, that also seems to star one of the actresses from this movie.
Okay.
But yeah, that just came out last year. But regardless, we're here to talk about The Call, which was a movie that I discovered looking for recommendations, and I saw sci-fi thriller a lot. I was admittedly a little doubting myself about 20 minutes into this, but I'm like, this feels like a horror movie so far. They're really hammering home some horror movie vibes. The descriptors were right. It is definitely more of a sci-fi thriller once it actually gets into the meat of it, and the premise is properly established and all that. So we will start spoiler free, of course. We'll give you a warning before we get to spoilers. If you are enjoying the show, please do hit the like button on YouTube. It helps us out a bunch. And of course, you can get bonus shows from me and David over at Patreon, but I'll tell you more about them at the end of the show. The premise of The Call is that a young woman, 28 years old, Se-yeon, goes to her mother's house, and there's an old phone she finds in a closet, which she plugs in because she needs access to a phone because she's lost hers. And when she answers that phone when it rings later, it turns out to be a woman about the same age as her, but from 1999, which is, this movie's set in 2019, so it's 20 years prior.
Yeah, it's exactly 20 years prior, because they show like
to the day.
Certain characters are literally looking at clocks and like timing up the exact same time.
So it's exactly 20 years prior, and they maybe try and affect things. We'll just say that the character in the past doesn't seem to have the best home life. Their mother seems to kind of lock them up and things like that, and that's kind of where the plot starts. Now, admittedly, it develops a lot beyond that, but it's all very, very spoiler-rific, so we're not going to say anything else, but that's how the movie starts, to be at least. So, yes. So that's the basic premise. It sounded interesting on paper from what little was in the various synopsis that I read, but went in pretty cold. I assumed you'd never heard of this until I...
Nope. I mean, I had to double check to make sure I was watching the right film, obviously, because the SEO on this is horrible. But once I managed to lock it down, I tried to purposely avoid everything I could, didn't read the synopsis and all that. And I do have to agree with you. The first 20 minutes of this, I was like, God damn it, Pete's making me watch a horror film.
There's a couple of moments where she hears a noise in the house and she's putting her ear up against the wall, and I'm like, this is like a horror movie scene. Have I miscalculated this a little bit?
I stayed up pretty late to watch this one, so already everyone was asleep. It was a nice quiet house. I had my headphones in, and then all of a sudden, jump scare, loud bang noise, and I'm like, oh, cool, great, glad, thank you, movie.
See, I wouldn't even think twice about that. I was just worried that I put it on the wrong show, but I never stopped to consider that you were a little scaredy cat and we're getting upset.
I have said this numerous times, how I am not good with horror.
That brings me comfort.
Yeah.
I was at a dentist the other day, right, and they were putting a needle in my mouth to give me anesthetic, And I was thinking, yeah, this is obviously unpleasant, but I know how scared Connor would be if he was the one getting this done, because he's got a childhood fear of this stuff because he had a bad experience with a needle at the dentist. And I was like, you know what? I feel like a badass right now because I'm just thinking of Connor. And it just, you swim right through.
I don't think that sentence has ever been uttered before. I feel like a badass right now because I'm thinking of Connor.
In comparison, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So anyway, David, what did you think of The Call?
Oh, boy, this is a tough one to talk about without spoiling. I liked it. I think that I don't know, it's such a roller coaster for me because I think that the opening act of this set me up for a very specific tone that then it didn't deliver on, but I was okay with the way that it pivoted. I liked the change that it made about a third of the way through the movie. And then once it became more increasingly aware of what this movie was, I did really like it. That being said, I don't think that the ending fully delivered as much as I wanted it to. I think that there was a lot of potential with the MacGuffin that they set up with this phone that they explore a good amount of it, but there was so much more that I think they could have done with it, whereas the last act kind of just throws it by the wayside and ignores it for a lot of the time. So it's a roller coaster, but on the whole, I think I enjoyed this one more than anything else. I will say that their representation of, I don't want to say time travel because it's not time travel, but like the representation of how the timeline works is absolutely baffling to me, and I just had to accept this is how the movie's doing it and move on, because if I try to sit and reason it out, it's not going to work.
That's probably for the best. Just in general, I think, regardless of what movie you're watching. I feel pretty positive on it. I think the opening act does feel a certain way, and it feels like it starts to get interesting. You see what they can do with this gimmick, with this mechanic of the phone, and the two people talking to each other 20 years apart. And it starts to play with that, and you can kind of like say, okay, this is what the movie's going to be now. And then it starts to take a turn. And I think the key element of the turn that it takes, I do actually quite like, which is, okay, it's this idea, but what if? And like, I can almost hear the pitch meeting for when they were breaking the story in a room. I mean, assuming it was more than, one person coming up with it. Yeah. But I can almost hear the thought process of putting it together and it kind of working in that level. Honestly, like, I don't necessarily even think the third act throws away the mechanics so much. My only real problem with the ending is the very final little tacked on bit. I did not like. There's a little just... It's practically a mid-credit scene, honestly, but
I wasn't sure if I should bring that up because it does feel kind of spoilery, but yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. It felt so weird having that tacked on there. It
felt unneeded, and it didn't, at least as much as I've had time to think about it, which has been 10 minutes, basically, I've not really been able to make it make sense with like the rest of the ending that I thought did work and did make most, at least based on the movie's rules up until that point, it made sense, right? Obviously, if you want to start taking out your time travel, like, well, actually, I don't think this would work for that reason. That's pointless, doesn't matter, leave it at the door. But based on this movie's own logic, I thought everything seemed to be working. And then this little tacked on bit felt a little bit weird. And it did sour the ending a bit for me, I will say. But generally speaking, I do think the ideas that it has are quite good. They're quite interesting. The movie, I think it's pretty solidly directed, and it's relatively well paced. I do think there's the odd little moment where I was feeling like this could maybe be a little streamlined to feel like it flows just a little bit better. There's times when it's jumping around the two different time periods where maybe it wasn't as coherent as I would have liked to have been. I think there's maybe just a little bit more skill could have went into juggling the elements, I guess is the way I'd put it. But by and large, the ideas felt very creative, and it felt like someone had an idea and they wanted to sort of play with it, and just how helpless it would make certain characters feel when someone in a different time, well, not even time period, well, it is a time period, but like someone 20 years ago or 20 years in the future is in trouble and you can't really do anything to help them, and how do you play with that, or how vulnerable do characters feel in certain situations because of this mechanic? That's there, it works quite well. If I was to maybe wish for anything else, it would maybe just have the main character, who I think is fine, but just if she was just a little bit more developed, where I was really like invested in her as a person, I think it would have just sent it over that great edge of like, this went from being good, and fun might not be the right word, but yeah, kind of fun, into, this is actually like a really compelling thriller with something to say. I think like the character arc of the movie, I think is fine. It's solid. It is pretty easy to get and understandable. I wish it was a little bit deeper than it was, but I guess when you're playing with so many mechanics for the plot to work, maybe you've got your attention's spent elsewhere because you're too busy focusing on making sure all this time mechanic stuff works with the phones and the two time periods.
Yeah, I mean, I will say there is a solid theming throughout, specifically relating to how these characters relate to each other, as well as how they relate to their own mothers simultaneously. There's this theming that really bounces around that concept of like people who don't feel like it's almost like the Back to the Future sort of thing, where it's people who don't feel like they can relate to their parents, and then you get to see the parent through a different lens because of this weird time traveling thing going on. I think that there's some interesting stuff coming out of that, but I do agree with you is that there is a little bit of a weirdness in pacing and character development about halfway through, I would say, at least for me. I don't know if it's the same place you were putting it, but it is a problem of, I kind of just felt like the main character, or our protagonist, I should say, is put on the back burner for an exceedingly long amount of time. And when they end up pulling her back into the limelight, it doesn't feel like we ever really do that much of a big development with her after that. It just kind of feels like she is passively being drawn through this plot until we get to the end. And then finally she kind of does something in the third act.
Yeah, I don't know if I feel as strongly as that, but I get what you're saying to an extent, is that maybe her trying to problem solve, because to me, like, there was a problem to solve in the third act for her. Like, how do I win the situation I'm in, given what's going on? Because it does seem relatively impossible. And there is like a really good idea that comes out of it, but I almost wish that there was a little bit more build up to like thinking of that idea. Like how does she get to that conclusion? And I'm really talking around a lot of things right now. I'm like doing like a very erratic dance around like just a floor full of nails with just a couple of spots that I can step on, and I can't step on anywhere else. But yes.
The one thing that I did want to bring up though is, again, can't spoil too much, but there is a few major special effects sequences in this that kind of give a representation of how they view their timeline and how they adjust to that. I think those were done very well. I think they provided a very clear visual metaphor of what is happening on screen, and it is like top tier stuff there in terms of how they managed to make it work.
Yeah, that's it feels very big in a way that I don't think I was expecting from the movie. I was expecting kind of like a low-key thing, and it gave me this big visual of like, oh, something's changed in the timeline, so here's all of this. And it's like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And it raises some questions that the movie kind of starts to poke at and prod at. Not necessarily answered outright, but you do keep yourself guessing because of it. So, yeah. But I mean, all this is to say that it is pretty good. It's the sort of thing I think a rewatch might even help it a little bit, knowing what it is going in and like what to expect, and sort of like maybe pay attention to some of the details a bit more as you're going through.
Yeah, I would say there's one or two characters in this, and they're like tertiary characters. They're not even like something that has a major focus, but there's a few characters in this that even after I'm finished watching the movie, I don't entirely understand their point in the plot. Specifically, there's a shop owner or a woman who works at a shop. I couldn't piece together who that woman was, and yet she seemed critical to the plot at a certain point, but ultimately I was able to just brush her off.
I could tell you there if you like.
Okay, fair enough. Maybe I just wasn't paying close enough attention, but like I just missed that entirely, and it got me very confused as to like, wait, was this always a thing? Did this just recently become a thing? I'm so confused.
They kind of did it in a rule of threes. They sort of established there was a tease of what her deal was, and then there was like an actual kind of like explanation. So
okay, I remember the explanation. I don't remember her before that point.
Yeah. It was definitely set up because I was wondering about her before they went back to her.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, yeah, I think we'll probably just have to go into spoilers soon. I don't know how much more we could really say without just getting into the meat of what the movie is. Yeah. But it's kind of playful with its ideas. It's inventive. It feels like it's just like shy of greatness. Like it's pretty good, but there's something just not quite like hitting the 3-pointer. But what
was the one we just did? I can't remember what it was. It was that one that sorry, I have it up here. It's What's Inside. I feel like we said similar things about that, where it was like the concept was like really good and they almost pulled it off, but then it was just lacking in a few ways.
I mean, I think this is better than that.
Yeah, I'd say so too. But I think that it's that same sort of idea where it's like you have this really interesting concept and you have a way that you want to play with it, and it's like it works, but you're just resisting pulling the trigger on one or two extra things that would have pushed it over to that extra realm.
Yeah, this gets a lot closer though, because I still feel like this was quite thrilling for the most part to watch, whereas my big problem with What's Inside was that at a certain point I just felt nothing from what was going on, because it felt lackluster. I don't think this feels lackluster for the vast majority of its runtime.
Yeah, no, I think honestly, I think that's one of the biggest credits to this movie, is that it is at the point where I think I have, the general gist of it figured out of where it's going to be. It somehow like keeps it exciting. I don't think it ever pulls like any major twists that I could never see coming, but it still keeps it exciting of how it explores the things that I pretty much figured would have already have happened. Yeah.
So I think we have to give spoiler warning here, just because it's impossible to talk around a lot of what happens in this movie. So spoilers for The Call. You have been warned. We're about to get into it properly.
Yes.
So here we go. I think the first thing I'd want to say is that, okay, so you've got this concept. You've got a woman who's having a sort of an estranged relationship with her mother, right? Who's in the hospital because she's sick. We'll come back and talk about like her character and everything that's going on.
Yeah.
But she finds this phone, it rings, and she thinks it's the wrong number, but it turns out to be a woman about the same age as her, but 20 years in the past, 1999. And they start communicating. It seems like this woman in the past, Young Suk's her name, she seems to be getting abused by her mother, or at the very least badly mistreated, locked in a room, forced to eat certain things, and we don't really have the full context for it, but it's definitely presented early on as, oh, this is a horror movie. This girl is living a horrible life because her mother's evil or something like that.
Yeah.
And the reveal as the movie goes on, which, it goes down a path first, which is like, hey, can we affect the past because I can tell you to change something in the past, which is a big deal because it's her dad died, right? So the main character, Se-yoon, her dad died in 1999 in an accidental house fire, and they intervene and they stop that, right? Young Suk in the past is able to stop that, and then the dad is alive, and we have this new reality kind of form around the main character. But what the movie's really about is the idea that, okay, you find this phone that can communicate with the past, and you basically get to cheat the timeline with another person. But what if that other person turns out to be a serial killer?
And it baited me so well. I'm so happy that the movie did that, because they open it up and Young Suk is clearly got some level of issues, but it's also very obvious that she is being abused. So you are willing to forgive as many issues as possible just because you see how awful her home situation is. And by the time we get to the point where they change the timeline, like right before that moment, I thought it was going to be a thing of like, the timeline's written in stone. Everything that you try to do is just enforcing the timeline itself. It was always going to be this thing of the house fire. Like shit, like Young Suk does something to cause the house fire, like just by her presence there. I thought it was going to be something like that, but no, they do a full sequence of showing the timeline change. And the key point to this is that the timeline changes around Se-yoon. She's able to remember everything from the original timeline.
Yeah, she always remembers what she grew up with. Yeah. But the reality around her change, it's like it disintegrates and like goes away, and it's kind of disorientating. And when she gets reformed, her hair's longer now. Like there was this great visual in the movie actually where she starts off with sort of shoulder length hair, and that's in the sort of like the original sad timeline. But then she's in the happy timeline when her dad's alive, so she's got long hair, she's got party hair, and then when things get bad again later on, she's back to the shoulder length hair. I'm like, oh, we're back to a sad timeline. This is the dad's dead hair is what she has at the start, and then after a certain point. So that's like a fun visual trick just to let you know what's going on as an audience, because you just establish what something means in a weird way. But once it sort of goes from there, and it's like, oh, and then the next danger is the idea that the mother of Young-suk is going to kill her, possibly accidentally, but she's going to kill her. And this like, oh, and so immediately our main character starts getting worried, says, hey, you have to do something, you have to stop, you're going to die, you're going to, like, your mother's going to kill you. And even though Young-suk kills her mother, and it isn't necessarily self-defense, because we see the moment, right? It's more of a confrontation where she ends up killing her.
Yeah, I would argue still it's bordering on self-defense.
It's bar. I mean, the situation's kind of de-escalating, and she just kills her anyway. But
yeah,
but it's like, okay, you know what? She had you locked in a house. It looked pretty bad. Well, it's not the right thing you've done. At least we can understand why you killed her. We can understand why you had this hatred for this stepmom that you felt mistreated by for so long. Because keep in mind, she's 28, but she's locked in a house like she's... I mean, not that you're supposed to lock young children in a house like this, but...
I was going to say, Peter, we're about to get some backstory on you that we didn't know about.
But normally when you tell this story of someone being abused by their parent, they tend to be young, not 28. So
yeah. It's also worth noting, though, that she is very... Whether this is because she's locked in the house or it's, you know, she's locked in the house because of this, she's very developmentally regressed. She acts like a 16-year-old. She's like in love with this one band that like strikes it more as a 16-year-old, like going after a 90s boy band rather than a 28-year-old woman.
Yeah, they present her as, particularly whenever we hear her mother talk, and her mother's her stepmother, I should say, she's not her real mother. Whenever she's presented, she's always very cold. Her hair's very like tied up, and she's always very conservative looking and very almost sinister the way she'll sit there. And they present it as if, okay, Young-suk, there's mentions that she was in some sort of mental hospital at some point, and now she's living back at home, and the stepmother is into spiritualism and wants to basically try and ward off whatever evil spirits in her. Like, she thinks she's possessed or something, so she's burning various things, she's making her eat special things, she's putting like symbols around her door, and it's all, you know, it feels like, okay, she's torturing her, and it seems like it's coming from this place of religious extremism.
Yeah. I was going to say, I can easily picture the Americanized version of this, of like the super, like, the power of Christ compels you sort of thing, of trying to get demons out of your kids.
Yeah, someone who just watched The Exorcist too many times is like convinced their kid's possessed when they're actually just a little shy or something, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's never the shy ones. It's always the thing of like, oh, he's into like rock music or whatever, or his hair is down to his shoulders. Gotta whip that into shape.
Yeah, and there was a point before they fully revealed it where it clicked, wait, is this movie going to be about how the dangerous one is actually the girl she's been on the phone to the whole time? Because it's almost like a giant red herring that she went out of her way to save her dad, so it makes you look at her as a hero. But that's really just sort of seeing, can she affect something? Is she become attached to See-yoon and wants to be a best friend to her? Because, of course, once her dad's alive again, we go through a part of the movie where Young-suk gets upset because Soo-yeon's never there to answer the phone anymore because she's spending too much fun time with her parents at Christmas. It's like, oh, her parents are taking her shopping, her parents are doing this, they're having dinners, they're out in the fields, they're whatever hobbies they've got. Yeah. And she's like feeling mad that she's not there for her anymore. And it's not until See-yeon kind of looks her up and finds out what happened to her that she gets concerned and warns her about the mother coming to kill her. And then that sort of starts the ball rolling on the rest. But you don't really know that she's just a dangerous serial killer yet. But there was definitely a moment somewhere in there where the idea kind of clicked, and I went, "Oh, this feels like this is the real twist of the movie." It's not that can we affect the present day. It's that how dangerous is it when a serial killer who knows you personally can affect your life 20 years in the past? Like, because and that's, you know, because ultimately she ends up killing the dad again. That we get there eventually, but. Like there's like a level of threat that's just lingering throughout all that middle part of the movie once that's kind of established.
Yeah, once they set up what the gimmick was and how this phone would work, immediately my mind got to working of like, okay, what's going to be easier? Is it going to be that Si-yoon is, reading off Wikipedia and just saying like, oh, hey, this thing is going to happen and making Young-suk's life better? Or is it going to be something where Young-suk is altering the timeline to make Si-yoon's life better? And obviously when they first set up the gimmick, I was still thinking the timeline was fixed. So I thought the entire point of this movie was going to be passing back information to the past and like allowing, like, what does that do? What does that allow for them to accomplish together as this sort of like tag team? But obviously I think that only happens like twice over the course of the movie, one of which is just to say like, oh, hey, this band is going to be doing a thing. And then the other one is, by the way, your mom's going to kill you. And that's really about all they do for passing back legitimate information. But they do play with the idea of it.
Yeah, other than proving, like, because at first she's like, hey, I think you're in the past. And she tells her, hey, there's going to be a plane crash near this area like tonight. And sure enough, she sees it on the news that night and is like, oh shit, this is real. I'm talking to someone in the future. But of course, it's only 20 years in the future, meaning that the main character is a child in 1999. In fact, very close to my age. In fact, I noticed as I was watching this, I'm like, oh, this is only like a year or two off my age. Like, I'm about this age of this kid in 1999. So, yeah, that was kind of a weird experience to sort of realize.
Where would we be at now? If you picked up a phone and you were talking to yourself from 2005, what would you give advice-wise?
Oh, numerous things. Numerous things. I
mean, what age would I be at? I'd be in 7th grade. I tell myself to cut my hair immediately.
In 2005, you mean?
Yeah. I would be in 7th grade. Yeah. No, I would not. I was trying to grow my hair out for a while there. Did not work. Immediately abort that.
No, I was 16 in 2005. In 1999, I was 10, though, so I was very close to the age of this character, which is kind of weird. We're doing time travel plots now where I can remember the time period in the past that they're talking about. That just makes me feel great. Like, I'm still young.
We're going to do this every episode. I hope you understand that, Pete. Anytime that we do anything that's like 10 years or older, we're going to be like, this movie came out 10 years ago, Pete. Really ruminate on that.
And it hurts every time. It's not getting any easier.
No, just absolutely
pointing that out. The first time that ever upset me was there was like a movie where it did the movie opened with like a flashback to when the main character was a kid. And it was very disturbing that the year that they said they went back to was like the same like era when I was a kid. And I went, wait a minute. We're at this point now where the main character's like backstories when I was growing up. Oh no.
I guess the kind of thing that happens in this movie is that they have to have a justification in the very beginning as to why they're using a landline phone. Like, we had to have the main character's cell phone get stolen just to justify that a landline would still be used, which I guess is fair, but at the same point, you could just have a landline. It's already an old house. We don't have to justify that any further.
No, it's just really a reason for her to go rummaging and find this old phone in a box because, like, people still have landlines, especially older people. Like, it's not that uncommon to still find people with landlines.
Yeah.
It's just young people just said, why am I paying for this? I can just use my other phone.
Yeah, it's entirely out of a monetary concern.
Yeah. But, yeah, it's... Once it gets going, and they set up this premise, and you're like, okay, now she doesn't realize that Young-suk in the past could mess up her life by doing things back then, especially if she gets to the point where she wants to do it out of spite. And that's kind of like where the movie starts to go towards. I mean, the next big thing that happens after the death of the mother, and she, like, at first it seems all right in the sense that it just feels like it frees Young-suk, where she sort of goes out the house, she goes sort of like gallivanting, and she like changes her hair a little bit. She just seems to enjoy life without this person like keeping her locked in. But of course, as we find out, like, yeah, she was in a mental hospital for a reason, not because she was possessed with something or something that the spirits could ward off, but she does have legitimate problems.
Yeah, they show there's a police report later on that shows that she's diagnosed with like antisocial behavior and like borderline or something like that. So she has a lot of different mental things that are not good for dealing with other people.
Well, and this is something where the shopkeeper you mentioned earlier comes into it. So there's a scene early on before the dad's been saved, where Si-yoon's walking down past the shop and sees the woman sitting there, and has like a little moment of like, I think it's because she has the bandage on her leg that she also has, right? Because one of the things is that the main character got burned in the house fire that killed her dad. Like her leg had a burn scar on it, and there's a moment before the mother in the past is killed where she goes to see the young version of the shopkeeper, and she's got these bandages on. So it sounds like the reason why Young-suk went to the hospital in the first place is because she injured this girl at the time. Because the young shopkeeper was like passing her like candy and things like that she liked, like sneaking stuff to her that she wasn't meant to have, and then something went wrong. I never quite caught why she got upset with her, but
yeah, that's the part that confused me, is because later on they have the discussion of saying, and this is in the current day timeline, she's talking to CU and saying, yeah, I always thought she was like just a nice girl, I was giving her candy, whatever, and then one day she did this, and the only reason I'm alive is because the stepmother got involved. Like, that's the only thing that saved me.
Yeah, I think it's just the idea that, yeah, she's very friendly and nice with a new friend up until she suddenly isn't. And I think that's obviously what the main character's going through, is that, it's all nice and fun and games for the first, several phone calls, you helped save my dad, we're all happy family now. But as soon as she upsets her, even, obviously not intentionally, things take a bit of a turn. And it obviously raises this question of like, okay, where is Young-suk in present day? Is she alive? Where is she? And of course, we find out she got sentenced to life in prison for killing her mother and someone else, which is where we get to kind of next, which is at the very start of the movie, they introduce this guy who runs a strawberry farm who gives the main character a lift. And he pops up once or twice.
They do everything in their power to show that this is just the chillest dude.
He's a nice man.
He has no problems with anybody. He gives around free strawberries to anybody who asks. He's just the nicest guy you could possibly imagine.
And in the past, we see him come to the house. Because keep in mind, the reason why like they're connected at all is that Seyun's family moved into the house that Young-suk lived in as a kid, right? So so that's why they actually start interacting with each other in the past, is like Seyun's parents are there looking at the house to say, hey, maybe we'll take this house, maybe we'll buy it, and all that. Yeah,
that was such an interesting little scene where Young-suk is taken out of her room like while they are touring the house, and as soon as she hears Seyun's name, she's like, hold on a minute, I've been talking to someone on the phone named Seyun. And so she calls up Seyun, holds the phone out the door on speaker, and just like, hey, you can hear your dad talking. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, this is like,
yeah,
this is before we'll save your dad. This is like just right. This is when things are still good and they're still developing early on.
But this is that's the moment when like she comes to the realization. She's like, I think I could save your dad. I think I could do that. I'm gonna go ahead and try.
Yeah, and we know the day's coming up because, we've been reminded by the date and his gravestone numerous times, and it's like, okay, we're on the 27th of November, I think it was. Right. This is the time. She has to sneak out the house, though, because she's not really supposed to be leaving, but she takes the risk, she goes on the run, and she saves the dad. But yeah, the strawberry guy comes to her house. I will say the hair they gave the young strawberry guy did make me laugh, because I'm like, I mean, I don't remember people having hair like that in 1999, but I'll take the word for it.
It's the South Korean style, sure.
Maybe. And she's happy to let him in and accept free strawberries, even though she's kind of weird about it. But ultimately, because he goes to put the strawberries in the fridge and finds, like, cut up parts of the dead mum, he freaks out, and she's like, why did you have to look in there? And they do this really great thing in the present day to show you that something's changed, because as he's at the house with the main family in the present day, he's came over to deliver strawberries to Seyun and her parents. And obviously, we never even talk about how happy Seyun was to see her dad again and all that. That obviously all was there.
Oh yeah, they got a tearful reunion, and they're just like, what's wrong, honey? What's going on? And I've always wondered in these sort of time travel plots how the main characters square the fact that they don't remember a damn thing from before this exact moment. Like, sometimes that's the point of the story, but this one, she just has to kind of fake it. She's like, oh, everything's fine. Don't worry about it, Dad, who's still alive.
I think she just rolls with the punches, and he ends up not being alive long enough for maybe anything to come up.
Yeah.
This is what I can say. But the strawberry guy's over, and they're talking to him and saying, hey, why haven't you found a girl yet? Blah, blah, blah. And Se-yoon's eating some of the strawberries, and she spills a little bit of like the strawberry juice onto her arm, onto her sleeve, and she goes to answer the phone that she hears ringing, and it's when she's on the phone to Young-suk where she looks down at the sleeve and it fades away.
Yeah, she's not on the. It's the phone that's connected to Young-suk, but on the other end is actually Strawberry Guy, who's just calling out of like panic.
That's right. Saying, right.
Like,
yeah.
Please help me. She's gonna kill me. And then you hear the thud noise, and then damn, I just bought this suit.
Yeah, and she goes back downstairs, and Strawberry Guy's not there, and she's like, "Oh, where's so and so?" And the parents like, "Who? Who are you talking about?" Yeah. And it's like, "Oh shit, this woman can just take away anyone from the past, and it's like they've been dead for decades."
Yeah, I like the way that they did the transition here, because obviously everything was good and like nothing in her timeline seemingly changed after the mother was killed. Obviously, if she checked the news or whatever, it would have, because the stepmother was taken away for killing Young-suk. But she didn't notice anything change. It's only at this point where she goes down to the police station. It's just like, Strawberry Guy, he had a field and all that stuff. And they were like, that guy hasn't been alive for like 20 years. And they go and pull out like a record, and we see that Young-suk was arrested as a serial killer for killing those two people, but only just those two people at this point.
Yeah, I actually like the little detail here that the young cop had no idea who she was talking about, and it's the older cop who's clearly been, there for decades. Is like, yeah, I remember him. Like, yeah, he's been gone for ages. He died.
Yeah, in this sleepy little town of ours.
Yeah, I like. There's a lot of nice attention to detail with this stuff that I appreciate, especially at this point where it feels like all of it starts to work together quite well, and you start to understand what the consequences could be and what could happen. And at this point, when Young-suk phones the present day again, she wants Se-yoon to like do something for her, and Se-yoon, unwisely perhaps, because if I was her, I would like to think that I would maybe keep my cool and try and pretend that everything's okay, because I don't want to rile up the serial killer. But instead, she gets kind of like, "Hey, is it true? Did you kill your mother? Did you kill her? Like, tell me now." And she kind of admits to it, and it becomes this thing where Young-suk is like, "Hey, find out how they caught me, right? You say they sent me to prison for the rest of my life. I don't want that. How did they catch me? What evidence did they find so I can take care of it?"
And I love that immediately she pulls out the big guns of, "I saved your dad's life. You owe me."
Without saying she can take it away again, because right now it's just, "Hey, I did a good thing for you. You owe me." But
I don't think at this point she thinks she can take it away again. I don't think she's on that level yet.
I mean, I was certainly thinking it. Yeah, I would argue that, maybe it's not until the dad and young Se-yoon show up to look at the house again where she's like, "Oh, I have an opportunity here. Why don't you come in? My mum will be back soon from the store." Kind of thing. I think what's fun about this is that it presents this threat that the main character in present day has absolutely no control over, right? It's like she can't do anything about it. It's not like she can warn her dad, unless she can somehow have her dad in the past pick up the phone. And even later on, as we see when her mum does that, it's not like the mum's going to go, "Yeah, I believe you're my daughter. I'll take what you're saying seriously." Yeah. Like, it doesn't work like that way. So
this is absolutely one of the, I can't remember what the actual like code word was or anything like that, but probably like 5 years ago or so, I set up a code word with my brother of like, if either of us say this word, then like in the event of time travel or anything else going on, we just immediately believe the other person.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, all right. Very good. You shouldn't tell me, because that would ruin the...
Exactly, yeah. I can't. Also, I forgot, but Thanksgiving's coming up as we're filming this. I'll reestablish it over dinner.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, one of the details that I liked here, actually, is that before the dad and young Se-yoon come over, is there's a scene where two policemen come up to the house and basically question because the Strawberry Guy's missing. And the scene in and of itself is not particularly amazing, right? And there's just a nice little touch where she's kind of like lying about where her mum's been, when she left, why the strawberries are here, and she kind of corrects something because she sort of gets caught out in a bit of a lie, and she kind of plays it off as like, "Oh yeah, sorry, I must be mistaken. I said 2 days ago, must have been yesterday." And the notable thing here is the policeman scores out what he wrote and says yesterday instead, or 1 day ago, whatever. And this is only a detail that I like, because later on, when the young version of Se-yoon's mother goes to the police when there's a problem later, this cop listens to her because when he hears the address, he remembers that being fishy, and it kind of propels why he helps her when they're kind of ready to just let her walk out the station. Like, oh, you failed a missing persons report. We'll follow the protocols, but like we don't do anything immediately for that. But so I like that he only had that clue because the timeline has changed so that Young-suk killed a second person, right? Didn't die by her mother's hand, killed the mother, and then the timeline changed again when she killed the strawberry guy. And because the timeline is now changed, there's now this piece of evidence that can be linked when that address is brought back up later. I like that chain of events.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's interesting, but that's when the strawberry guy died and then all the fallout from that, that's where I had to just stop thinking about how the timeline works because it doesn't make sense. Like, at first I thought it was a thing of, okay, because we have Si-yoon passing back this information in order to allow her to get the upper hand on her stepmother, that's what caused the timeline to shift there. That's what caused her to be able to change things so that she's able to get ahead of it. Okay, good. That makes sense for me. I'm totally willing to accept that. But I'm pretty sure that Si-yoon and Young-suk do not have another conversation, or at least nothing where information is exchanged, before the strawberry guy dies. So when he rapidly disappears in the modern day, simultaneously with when he dies in the past, which is a strange sentence to say, but when he rapidly disappears, I thought that would have been because more information was given, but it turns out that it's just, no, we're working on a rolling 20-year delay. Anything that would have shifted 20 years ago changes now.
I think, one, it's probably good to think of it that way because they definitely established that time is moving forward in both, and you just have to accept that. I will maybe make an argument that Young-suk's temper is getting riled up by feeling ignored by Se-yoon in that time, and that maybe is what affects, like, kind of the in
like
some
if
way the
you
outcome.
Weren't ignoring her, she may not have attacked the strawberry guy.
She might not have answered the door. She might have. Who knows? Like,
yeah.
I think the interesting thing I was thinking about as it was going through these changes is that I'm like, well, they're still living in this house even after the death of the strawberry guy. So clearly, this timeline where she's caught by the police, they still end up buying that house.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sort of thinking, well, and as long as our main character Se-yoon's still alive, it means that nothing happens to child version of her. So there's like, you can sort of like deduce something based on what's still remaining in the present day.
Yeah.
And it's notable that when the next change happens, the house becomes derelict and no one's living there anymore. And she has to like find the phone later on and be like, okay, where is it so I can answer it?
I really wanted it to be that the moment that like it locks into place that she is caught by the police, the family gets even richer because they bought the house at a steal.
Yeah, it was really expensive, but because two people got murdered there, all of a sudden it's only like 30%
all of a sudden, like,
of the
we
price.
were able to save up an extra $10,000. Nice.
Plus, $1999 dollars versus
they invested that pretty well.
Yeah, house prices, very good. Yeah, I appreciated kind of like thinking about that a little bit as it was going through these motions. But yeah, it becomes this thing where, hey, like, to go and find out how they found evidence, and basically because she doesn't do it.
Yeah, she like unplugs the phone from the wall. She's not interacting anymore. She's just done with this.
Yeah, she gets scared. She unplugs, and it's when her dad's teaching her to drive in the present day, where young Soo-young and her dad are in the past. This is really complicated because one of the characters is named Young. So it's
going to get worse because we then later get an older version. So there's Young Si-yoon and Young-suk.
And there's Young Young-suk.
Young Young-suk.
Yes.
But that's just normal Young-suk because then we get old Young-suk.
That's true. Yeah. Oh, jeez.
This is like... Talking in tenses of time travel is already confusing, but having a character with the name of Young makes everything worse.
Yes. Dear. But obviously they didn't have to worry about that because they weren't thinking about English speaking people when they named this character, so they didn't care.
Yeah.
So it's fair enough, I guess. But so the dad is killed in the past, and we haven't really mentioned this yet, but Young-suk's method of killing is spraying someone with a fire extinguisher and then stabbing them. And although I wasn't sure if she was putting something else into the fire extinguisher canisters, like, is it just the regular stuff?
I have to assume it, at least at first it is. I can't imagine that, within the first 3 killings, she'd established, like, a method to her madness. So I have to assume it's normal.
But she clearly like doing it that way, because when we get the final timeline and we see, like, her house as a serial killer later, she has, like, a closet full of them. It's like, this is my main weapon of choice. I love this thing.
Oh, one thing I wanted to bring up, I don't know if this is better saved for later. You can stop me if so. The plot, all of it basically kicks off when Sung-ryung finds a hidden stairwell / room hidden behind a wall in her family home. Yeah. And it's this super creepy place. And we find out later on in the movie, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that this was basically where Young-suk was taken by her stepmother to be tortured.
Exercise, technically.
Exercise, but you tortured effectively. And then, like, throughout the movie, it keeps on becoming this recurring motif of, like, her going and standing near the sealed off wall and, like, trying to figure out, like, what's behind it. Because it's, I don't know, it's this weird thing of every once in a while they'll cut back to, like, that room as if it has some major significance outside of just being the initial thing that, like, gets her interested in all of this.
I don't know if there's, like, thematic significance necessarily. I mean, there might be, but
okay,
it kind of gets used a few times, because it's like where she's hiding the young version of Se-yoon at a certain point when she has her kidnapped after she kills her dad in the past. Because she kills her dad, and like I was, saying, like, in the present, he's teaching her how to drive, and he just disappears, and like the glass all from the car just kind of shatters. It's kind of what the poster's inspired by, actually. Once you get there and realize it, and she ends up just like lying in the middle of this tunnel that she was driving in before, and this is where things have completely changed. Turns out her family don't even live at the house anymore. It's derelict, and all that, and and that's the first thing, and there's just like messages in paint or blood written on the floor that's obviously aged because it's been 20 years, but it just says, "Answer the phone, So-yoon," and it's like, shit, I better answer this phone, and she has to find it. She gets to it, and it's like, okay, that was the consequence for not, like, unplugging the phone. Now you better tell me how they, like, figure out that I killed them so I can destroy the evidence. And this is actually where I really like the idea of, like, okay, you've got a villain who's 20 years in the past. How do we fight that? How do you possibly deal with that? And I actually really like the idea that Se-yoon comes up with is, instead of, like, telling her where the evidence actually is or the truth, she Googles accidents that happened on, like, the date, like, that's happening, and it's like, oh, there was an explosion at this place, this like, it was like a farm building, I think.
Yeah, it's like a greenhouse or something.
It's like, hey, you need to go there and, like, wait there. The guy who, like, collected all the loose evidence, like, he's got it stored there, and he's going to, like, realize what he's got, a murder weapon, he's going to turn it in, so you have to go and wait there. So the whole idea is that she's going to have the killer, Young-suk, go and wait in this location, and we can see, like, the sparks from the electrical outlet starting to go, and it's like, oh shit, this might work, this is genius. But she just happens to get, like, distracted by, like, the dog outside or whatever, goes outside for a second, and while she's kind of caught in the blast, she's not in the building, so it doesn't actually kill her.
Yeah, just manages to survive. And I mean, to be fair, I cheated a little bit, not because I meant to, but I did look at the time still being 30 minutes left in the movie as that plan was going through, and I was like, well, guess this isn't going to work.
That's why you shouldn't look at the timeline once
yeah, I didn't mean, I literally just had to pause to use the bathroom, and I was it was like just as that was coming up, so.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a fun thing, and I really like the idea of her just sitting there waiting for the phone to ring, because it's like, if she phones back, then it didn't work. If she doesn't phone back, then that's it, it's over. I can Google what happened to her, and maybe she'll be gone.
But I also like the idea that she's also just waiting to see if her own timeline changes as well. Like, maybe she's not even going to call. She's just going to straight up die at any moment. She's just going to fade out of existence.
And I got a little bit triggered in this scene because she gets startled because her phone alarm goes off, and it's exactly the ringtone that my alarm goes off with when I'm getting woken up. So I was like, that noise is horrible. What are you doing to me, movie? That's how I wake up.
Dude, a couple months back, I had to go to urgent care just to see a doctor because God knows I'm not going to an actual doctor. And they had the same exact call sound for my works call system. And the moment it started ringing, I was like, oh God, oh, please don't make me go back.
Yeah. But I just really liked it because I'm like, yeah, she's just sitting there waiting for something to change or for the phone to ring. And unfortunately, the phone does ultimately ring and she has to pick it up. And obviously now, if it didn't work, the killer is going to be pissed off.
Yeah. Well, you get the tiny little bait and switch where it's her younger self is on the phone saying like, oh, I'm scared. I think the killer did something, da-da-da. And then Young-suk picks it up saying like, I lived, bitch.
Yeah, I actually forgot about this now until we started talking about this scene. But then to make her point further, she pours hot scalding water onto the child's version of Soo-yoon. So in present day, Soo-yoon starts like screaming in pain because all these scars and like burn marks are appearing over her arms and legs. It's actually very vicious. Oh,
it's horrifying. I mean, the only thing that they're holding back on it all is that you do not see or hear the younger version being burned. But like the older version, she doesn't hold back anything. She is writhing and you see the blisters forming.
Yeah, she is having just an absolute torturous time. And it's like, okay.
Also, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, she's got the young version held captive. And the only reason why Young-suk, presumably at this point, isn't killing the kid is because this is too useful to have this person in the future that you can manipulate into telling you things.
Oh, yeah. You can. That's the thing about the torture is that you can do all of these awful, horrible things, and they will end up feeling it like right then as it's happening. But if you kill them, you lose your link to the future. So you are just able to inflict as much pain as you want in order to make your point, which is the most godlike and yet evil power I could imagine this person having.
But you don't want to like do anything that will make them like if let's say she paralyzed the kid, that would be. I mean, yeah, okay, she could still look stuff up in the computer for you, I guess, but like she wouldn't be able to go anywhere and like really like investigate things for you. So there's definitely a level of I have to keep her functional for the future because it's useful to her kind of thing. And
yeah, it's very manipulative and very like viciously thinking.
Yeah. And it's somewhere around here where Young-suk reveals something about the main character's past. This
is literally the next. That was what I was about to jump into.
Yeah, so earlier on, when it was doing the sort of the slow first act, like setting everything up before things really got going, it established that Seo-yoon's relationship with her mother wasn't great, and Seo-yoon's mother said she wanted to be buried next to her, her husband, her dead husband, and Seo-yoon was like, "You think you deserve to be buried there?" And I'm like, whoa, what did she do to earn that remark?
Yeah, she's also dying of like a brain tumor as well. Like, it's not like she's just talking casually about like, oh yeah, eventually when I die. It's like, no, she's dying in like the next couple weeks. This is not going to work out.
I mean, there's surgery happening, but there's a good chance she's not going to make it. So it's imminent. And she's really cold with her. And we find out that she blames her mother for her dad's death because she left the stove on. And that seems to be what caused everything. But the reveal here later on in the movie from Young-suk is that, no, the mother did turn off the stove, and you, because you were watching some fire safety video about stoves and like house fires, turned it back on yourself. You killed your dad. This was all on you.
Look, maybe this was like a translational thing. I'm not going to say that's not, but like the fact that this little cartoon video is saying like, turn on the gas. Go ahead. I'm like, pump your brakes, kid. This is the worst and safety video I've ever seen in my life.
I don't think it literally said turn it on. But...
No, it doesn't. But it says it's speaking about it very like blatantly. It's just saying like, oh yeah, if you got a fire, be sure to do this. It's like, okay, but like maybe just don't have a character that's literally a gas burner.
Yeah. I mean, it turned out to be her. And she's blamed her mother for it. One.
Yeah, it's like a repressed memory sort of thing, where like she can't accept the fact that she's responsible for killing her dad, so she just blames her mom. And her mom I don't know if her mom even knows whether or not she turned off the stove. But she's at least letting her kid believe it.
Well, I think it's darker though. If she actually is like she's been convinced by the kid that she never did, because it's the sort of thing that you'd be like, did I turn it off? Like it'd be easy to forget. You'd be like, oh, it's something I assumed I did, but like there's all sorts of little things you sometimes forget to do.
Yeah, that's literally one of those most common things. Is you hop in the car, you're half a mile away, and it's like, did I turn off the stove?
Yeah. So, but okay, it's one thing for her to realize that like it wasn't really her mother's fault. But even without that, the big theme for this movie to me was this idea that she doesn't appreciate her mother, right? She misses her dad, but she's kind of like not appreciating her mother while she's alive. So the final act being now the mother in the past is in danger, and these past 20 years that you've had with your mother might get taken away, is her finally coming to the terms with, oh, I've not really appreciated having her around. And that's actually terrifying. So that's kind of like what the character arc for the most part of the movie is, I think.
Yeah, and then theming wise, they spend the entire third act showing both the mother in the past and Soo-yoon in the present, like in the same sort of positions as they're talking on the phone to each other. So it's very much this mirroring going on of like, we're both going through the same situation here, but then it ultimately shows how the mother is willing to defend her child against anything. So it's got a nice little point to make. But then also, if you correspond that over with Young-suk, obviously her stepmother was vicious and evil and was willing to like stab her, even if it was for quote unquote good reasons. It was still, you know, an awful thing to do. And then Young-suk follows down the same path of like brutality and viciousness and evil.
Yeah. Even worse than her stepmother. So, because at this point in the past, the mother, like, where's my husband? Where's my daughter? They've been missing for like a day or whatever. So she goes to the police and ends up going to the house with the policeman to try and look and see, hey, were my husband and daughter here? Where are they? And
that is one thing that also happens here is that I'm gonna put this on Sung-ryung. She, in her little fake thing to lure Young-suk out to the greenhouse, she does tell her the actual things that happen. She just lies about the location. She says there's a junkyard guy who has the knife. He's going to report it to the police, and that's how you'll get caught. That's actually true. And so Young-suk finds the junkyard guy, and that's when the timeline shifts to being the derelict house where everything's awful because no one ever caught her. She was not able to be found by the police.
No. You're mixing two things up here. The derelict house was from before when... is before she fixes that. It's when she finds the junkyard guy and gets the evidence and destroys it that it turns into a functioning serial killer's house.
Right, her house.
Because all the fridges with all the blood and body parts all appear at that point.
You're right. Yeah, sorry. It goes from derelict to horror house.
yes, pretty much. And because that's when it goes to, oh, she's still functioning as a serial killer. She's been functioning as a serial killer for 20 years. And all of a sudden you realize, wait, the old version of her. And it's not even like she's that old. I mean, if she was 28 in 99, she's only like 48 now. Like, she's not that old. So she's around. She's here. And we actually see her, like, and, you know, ultimately, Soo-yun's like sneaking about and actually hears her and sees her leave. And for a little while is like trying to get to the phone. Because the other thing is that she broke into the police station and got the little book with all the details of the case. And she actually sees that change with this timeline change. And it says that her mother went to the house with the police officer and used the phone, and she's like, shit, I can warn her, I can like talk to my mother. So she tries to phone the house from the past and talk to her mother, but it's in front of Young-suk in the past who's trying to not let them use the phone. The mother picks up and is like, hey, get out of the house now, she's going to kill you, mom, get out of the house. And of course that just confuses her. She's like, some woman called me mom and said to get out the house. And that's when Young-suk stabs the cop in the neck. And okay, that's him done. Sorry.
I was going to say, I thought the cop had a chance, but very, very non-glorious death. It's just a quick little stab in the neck and he's out.
I think what I liked about this part, though, is that you realize that, and this is kind of what annoyed me about the tacked on bit at the end, actually. I don't want to talk about that yet, but I already got to the conclusion here that, oh, she doesn't need Soo-yoon anymore because now she can just talk to herself in the future.
Yeah.
Right? Because now we've got the old version moving around, and presumably she's been using the phone to talk to herself. And it doesn't actually reveal that. It kind of treats it as like a little twist at the end. that she's been doing that. But I already kind of just came to that conclusion, and for me that added stakes here at the end, because now she can just kill Soo-yoon and not give a shit. I mean,
yeah.
So okay, all right, that raises the stakes, and you have this interesting thing here where in the past her mother's trying to protect her daughter and save her, especially when she sees her that she's alive and has to. So we do this whole thing where the old version of Young Suk is coming at Soo-yoon with a weapon with intentions to kill in the present day, because why would you keep her alive now? There's no reason. And in the past, you've got young Suk going after the child version of Soo-yoon, but her mother jumps in and maybe even sacrifices herself to save her kid by like going over the railing with her, right? Because they're upstairs and they go over the railing. And it's played.
I can't speak enough of this knife going through her hand as well.
Oh,
like
yeah,
she just grabs the knife like barehanded to protect her kid.
She's kind of badass, actually. Honestly, in the scene, yeah, it's kind of well done. But the way it plays in present day, though, is that the older version of Young Suk coming at her with a weapon basically disappears, because Young Sun puts her hands up, gets scared, and then when she pulls her hands down, she's gone. And it really plays like, oh, because her mother pushed her over the railing, she either died or it changed the timeline so much that she got caught again or something. And it's like, okay, that saved her daughter's life. Is she alive? Did she die too? Did they both die in that fall? And it's kind of saved, your son. But
the movie is heavily implying that both of them died in the fall. I think that's the major implication, because then we see Soo-yoon run to the hospital that she's expecting her mom to be at. It's someone else in the bed. She goes to a graveyard, and we do only see the one grave, which I think is supposed to be the father.
Yeah, and we saw it earlier on, so I think we knew it was the father, yeah.
Yeah. The only thing that confused me about that is that he definitively died on that day, which we see was December 31st. It was New Year's Eve. But the subtitles at least say that it's December 11th. And maybe that's just a mistranslation or I
think it's a mistranslation.
Or something.
December 31st makes sense because it was originally the 27th, and then that he gets saved, and then he died a few days later at the house instead. So that date makes sense on the gravestone.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's remember that the young child, the young version of Seon-yoon, was only there for like the day, because that's when the mom reported it. So it couldn't have been the 11th, because that would have then been 20 days that she was locked in that house there. So it must just be a mistranslation on this end.
Yeah. Plus, in the past timeline, before all the chaos starts, when the mum and the cop are looking around, the young version of Young Suk is watching the year 2000.
The ball drop,
yeah. She's watching the New Year's stuff on TV, so we kind of definitely know what day it was. So yeah, that makes sense. It's just that day. So and that's what I liked all of this. This all made some sense. And then of course her mother shows up because she's visiting the gravestone, and they have like a heart to heart moment, and she hugs her, and and the main character has this smile, kind of probably the biggest smile she's given for the first time in the movie.
They show specifically, it's 20 years later, but the mother still has like a scar on her neck from being slashed, and a scar on her hand as well. And it's just this reminder of like, you spend your entire life blaming your mom for this thing that turns out wasn't her fault to begin with. But then she was also willing to sacrifice like so much of herself for you to protect you. And it's like really reestablishing that this relationship is so much stronger than it ever was before.
Yeah. And it's a nice, sweet moment. It all works. And the movie ends, and I was ready to be like, hey, great, that was a good ending, that really worked, everything clicked together, it was great. And then
single title, and then back,
and then it does some little things where it starts, and at first I wasn't mad, because I thought, it's just going to like explain some of the other little timey-wimey things that they didn't have time to explain earlier. I thought it was going to do that, here's how this little thing worked, or here's how that little thing worked. But basically it shows the old Young Suk and the young Suk talking to each other on the phone, and saying, hey, no matter what happens, keep this phone with you so we can keep talking to you. That's the old one talking to the young one. And basically, as they're talking and plotting, we go back to the shot of Seo-yoon and her mother walking down the path, and the mother disappears. And it's like...
Yeah, we see that her going over the railing, she like didn't die. She sits up slightly, and that's when you then see the mother start disappearing. So... she was able to somehow get out of that, and then like the timeline only partially reset because it thought she was dead. I don't understand what happened here.
That part's really weird. But like even like I'm willing to ignore that, right? I'm willing to say that she didn't kill the mom right then and there. She got up and left because she knew it was like she's injured. She has to go and recuperate, so she flees, goes somewhere else, and comes back and kills the mom sometime later, and that's when the timeline changes again. I'm happy to accept that because that makes some sense to me. The problem I have is why did the old version of Young Suk disappear when she was attacking Soo-hyun? If the timeline, if she didn't die in the first place, that change there feels like a bit of a cheat to me, given this little tacked on ending that they've pulled. And I think the other thing is that I didn't really feel like it needed that, oh, gotcha, the bad guy wins ending. I really didn't feel like this movie needed that. I felt like her reconnecting with her mother and learning what her mother actually means to her was a satisfying conclusion to what her story was. That this, like, oh no, the killer, like, was still formidable and won, just feels like a weird, like, negative thing to just tack on at the end. I don't know.
I mean, just to specifically clear up what you're saying there, not only did the mother die, we also get a shot of Soo-hyun strapped down to the chair in the basement, and she's apparently been stuck there for some time. In present day. So, I don't know. As soon as this ending happened, I was like, this feels to me not like it's supposed to make any sort of sense, but it's just supposed to be one of those things that like YouTube commenters are just going to be like, what does the real ending of the call mean? And like someone breaks it down for 15 minutes.
The problem is, though, I don't think it's interesting. I think the interesting ending already happened and it was over. And then they tacked this shameless bit of like shock stuff on at the end. And all it does is imply that Se-yoon's been held captive by the killer for her entire life, basically, ever since her mother's been dead. Yeah,
maybe that's the reason that the old version disappeared, is because in the new timeline, she would never need to go and attack her because she's always been prisoner here.
Why keep her alive?
She clearly likes to torture. Like,
because you can't say she has to keep her alive until she's at least 28, so that all the events play out as they originally did with the phone calls, because that timeline's been wiped anyway. So, you know, the way the time travel in this has been working, or the time changing, I should say, has been working. You don't need to keep her alive for that. So this little tacked on ending just did nothing but annoy me, make the ending not happy, and like muddy up the waters of how it works.
All right, I don't think it would make the ending any better in terms of enjoyment, but let me alter one thing, and you tell me if you think it works better with how we've established the timeline.
Okay.
We get the mother disappearing. That shot still happens. Then we get a shot in the past of Young Suk approaching the young version of Soo-hyun with the knife, and then present day version also fades out. Cut to credits.
I mean, it's better from like a timey-wimey point of view. I don't think it's better from a satisfying conclusion point of view.
Definitely not.
Like, I just don't think this needed the the bad guy won, like, gotcha at the end. I just don't think this needed that. I think the satisfying character beat, like, if anything, I would have wished they'd developed this a little bit more, but I think the depth of the movie being that she understands how important her mother actually is to her, that she's not been appreciating her existence, and now gets a second chance to do that.
Yeah.
So, because the whole thing is like, okay, at face value, it's, oh, we can like stop my dad from dying, so I get to like rekindle my relationship with him. But the real story of the movie is that she's not been appreciating her mother and has a chance to rekindle it before she's gone, which is just a normal thing in real life. It's just made more literal in this movie because she literally learns and like changes the timeline and like, you know, so it takes the normal thing, which is, oh, I've got a strained relationship with someone, but we, you know, I learn more about her, I forgive her for it, and we can move on and like have a better relationship with whatever little time we have left, versus, you know, this.
Yeah. No, I think the scene that I was looking for, and I was thinking about this after the fact, the scene I was looking for is during the period where the father is alive again, have Soo-hyun still be very cold to her mother. And the father calls her out on it. And it's just like, she's always been great to you, like that. And obviously in this new timeline, there's no reason for her to be upset with her mother anymore.
That would have been, yeah, I agree. That would have been a good idea to kind of like challenge her notions of what her mother is, and kind of like have the person she's kind of idolized as the guy who's not, you know, the tragic father who disappeared and died. Like, have the person she's idolizing call her out for like not respecting the other person. It is an interesting angle to take there.
Yeah, and then once the timeline changes again, and now that she's come to respect the new version of her mother, she gets the reveal, oh, but she never was the old version you had in your mind. She never did cause that fire. That was always you. And it didn't even need to be her, but like, as long as it wasn't the mother, that's the main point of it. And then that would allow her to then completely reevaluate and see her mother in this new light come the final timeline.
And arguably, there's even some strength, and it still was her mother's fault, but this is more just about learn to like forgive and move on, because like, there's definitely some extra layers to that relationship that I think could have been fleshed out. I think the movie was pretty fun, and the idea of like, okay, we're in this time mechanic, but the person that I'm involved with turns out to be a killer and dangerous, and now they can basically just ruin my life in the past, and there's very little I can do about it. How do I think my way out of that? I love all the ways it plays with that. I wish it did even a little bit more. I think it's just a shame that this tacked on ending that's like, hey, the movie was over, but we have to just take away the happiness, just feels mean-spirited in a way that just... I don't think it adds anything to the movie, because it's not like it reveals, oh, there's a new element to this that you never thought of, that all like completely reshapes how you think of it.
There's another line in the house nobody knew about.
You know, it's kind of... It feels like just a gotcha ending for the sake of a gotcha ending. In the same way that a lot of horror movies feel the need to have like one final jump scare, even though the bad thing's been defeated, or we have to just get the audience one last time. And it just feels kind of cheap. And whatever rating we're about to give this, this little tacked on ending is deducting a whole point from my score.
That's fair. I don't know if it's worth that much for me, but I do think what I said early on in this review is that I felt like the mechanics were kind of tossed out for the third act. Obviously, the idea that Young-suk is able to kill the mother and then it immediately impacts the life of Soo-yeon, like it changes her timeline, that's still in play. What I wanted more of is cleverness from Soo-yeon. Being able to use the fact that she has all of this 20 years of knowledge at her fingertips. Because they even have a full conversation at the beginning about how smartphones are able to do literally anything. And I felt like that was really setting up this idea of information being so much more readily available in the future is going to play a major part in this. But she does the one thing about getting her to the greenhouse, and then the part about seeing her mom being at the house on the cordless phone, that was just because she broke into a police station. That had nothing to do with Googling or Wikipedia or anything like that. I wanted to see her be more clever and use her future knowledge to fight against Young-suk. And the fact that that didn't really happen in the end just kind of came down to a slasher fight, I just was a little bit disappointed by that.
That's fair. I don't necessarily mind, because I think once you have like it playing out in the house in both parts of the timeline, I think it's still playing with its mechanic enough that I can get into it. And especially with the whole idea of like the mother saving her daughter in the future without even realizing that her daughter in the future is in danger is kind of poetic in a way that I can really get into as an artistic flourish, I suppose. But the tacked on ending just kind of stings. It just feels so unnecessary. And just kind of leaves you with a bit of a much worse taste in your mouth than I think you'd otherwise have. Which is not to say that the movie was perfect beforehand, but it was a really solid little experimental sci-fi thriller beforehand with lots of cool ideas. And the ending just kind of dings it a bit, which is a shame. So, I don't know. Yeah. I guess we're kind of at that point where we're going to be asking the questions. David, what was your scene of the movie?
Boy, I was thinking about this. I think the scenes that held the most impact for me, there were three contenders. Two of them are basically identical in a lot of ways, and they are the two major timeline shifts scenes, like the special effects heavy ones.
Where reality kind of like breaks away and
yeah. I think that those both, like, they just did a good job of, the first one did a good job of setting up, okay, we're explaining exactly what's happening through visuals. Without saying a word, we understand that all of reality is shifted around her, not including her. She still has the mental state. And you see, like you said, with the long hair, you immediately get the vibe, this is the good timeline. Like, they don't have to say a thing, you just understand that now. When the dad dies, same sort of thing, but that one hits more of an emotional point. That one, they play for a lot more of like stunning visuals of the dad is just being taken away right in front of her eyes. So that has its own point. The only other one that I would also consider in contention is once she unplugs the phone in the present day, we have this long segment of Young Suk just like redialing constantly, and you see her just getting more and more manic and like angry. And I felt the actress did a really good job of really portraying that. I felt the psychoticness coming off of her, of how much she was like, how like already plotting her revenge as soon as she gets her back on the line. Like, it was already happening. But out of those three, I think I'm probably going to give it to the initial timeline shift, where we see the reality warp. I think that it's a clever visual, and it does a great job of just pivoting the plot into this other direction where, again, it caught me off guard because I thought the timeline was going to be solid. So to see this all happen just right in front of our eyes, it did a very good job at that.
Yeah, those are all good picks. I think I really liked when it changed near the end, and it was like from the derelict house into the serial killer's lair with all the fridges with all the body parts and blood and stuff in them. Because it just kind of felt like, oh no, this is like, we've been going through all these timelines and we've hit the worst one where the villain is still at large, where they're still here. They're now a present danger, like in your face threat. Because all throughout the movie, this threat's been in the past. She's been 20 years separated. But for the first time, our main character has to actually deal with her one-on-one, and she has to hide from her and whatnot. I think because of the flourish of ideas that came with that transition and realizing what that meant for what the main character now has to like survive through, I thought that was quite an exciting shift in the movie. But yeah, so I'll pick that. But to be fair, there's a lot of good moments in this one. It's actually got a lot of things to choose from, so I'll go with that.
I will fully give the props to literally the props crew of getting all of those refrigerators, because it's just such a good shorthand for they're full of body parts.
Yes. Yeah, you imply a lot without showing too much, which is good. So all right. Plus, it's interesting having such a vicious female serial killer in a movie. It doesn't tend to be that way, so it's cool.
Yeah.
All right, MVP of the movie.
I'm trying to think if there's any justification for anyone else, but not really. I'm thinking Young Suk. She's just the most compelling character. She's got this, I wouldn't say deep backstory, but you get to see the home she came from, and then as soon as she's able to take control of her own life, you just see this turn in her where all of that sympathy that they managed to build up in the first part just immediately gets flushed down the drain because she's clearly psychotic and does awful, horrible things. So it's nice to see that the writers are able to play with the character so well. And then the actress, like I said, one of my contenders for moment of the movie was just the way that she portrayed that manic, psychotic, violent energy. So I will fully give it to Young Suk.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, she's probably my pick as well. I do think Seo-yeon's pretty solid, but...
Oh, yeah, she is. But again, I would have wanted her to remain as clever as she was in that, like, planning the death scene of, like, the explosion. I wanted her to maintain that, and it kind of just felt like she was a bit more passive towards the end rather than as active as she was there.
Yeah, I will say, if I have a critique about not so much Young Suk herself, but more just some of the story around her, particularly in the opening act. Obviously, it's important that we sympathize with her because that makes it harder when we find out she's actually dangerous and whatnot. But I do think some of the stuff that feels a bit more horror movie-esque, with finding the hole in the wall, the secret basement, and some of the more abstract kind of like moments that the main character has when she sees that stuff for the first time, actually feels a little out of the place now that I've seen the whole movie. Where I'm like, it felt like you were trying to, like, I don't know, just build more mystique around something that didn't need the mystique. Like, the interesting part was the phone call, and then learning who this person was just by seeing what they were going through when we see her side of the story. All these, like, spooky things she's finding up front just kind of felt like they were going for more sort of generic horror movie vibes. So yeah. I would I'm not even taking that away from the character per se. I thought of it as we were talking about her, so there you go.
Yeah, I do think that this movie, even once it does get into the full plot of what it is, it still really wanted to be a horror film. Like, it really did want to have this sort of slasher aspect to it. And I think that's kind of what that sting is there for in the end, is like you said, there's a bunch of slasher movies where they have to have that last little thing, that last little gotcha moment. But ultimately, because of what the middle acts really are, I don't think it ever really could have been that slasher movie. It gets a bit too high concept to do that.
It's too much of a sci-fi movie. And and I would even say it was going for slasher movie. I would say most of that first act stuff was going for supernatural as a ghost in the house stuff. Like, that's what all that stuff was doing.
I was just for a moment, I was getting Cabin in the Woods vibe of, she opens up the diary and it's like, oh, here it is. This is the thing.
Yeah. So yeah. All right. So we both picked Young-suk. What are you rating The Call out of 10?
Boy. I don't know. I think it is very well made. I like a lot of the concepts. I just wish it went further in certain things, and then obviously stopped about 10 seconds earlier. I think that's a major component there.
Once it cut to the credits, just play the credits. That's all I wanted.
Honestly, I would suggest that to the audience. Obviously, you should have watched this before going to the spoiler section, but if you didn't and you still want to check out the movie, as soon as it cuts to black and you see the first name, you could stop.
Just
you
stop
don't need to keep going.
Yeah, everything after that just makes it worse.
Yep. Overall, if I have to include that moment, and also just taking into account the things that I was kind of hoping to get out of it that it just didn't deliver on, I think I'm gonna end up 6.5. I feel like I don't know. Here's the thing. If I don't count those last 10 seconds, I think it breaks into the 7. But counting them, 6.5 almost feels too high as well. So I'm going to say 6.5. That's where I'm coming down on. But just know that it is error bars that stretch all the way down to like a 5.5.
Yeah, I actually was thinking 6.5 as well. And because I genuinely think if it ended when it cut to credits, I would be happily handing this a 7.5. I'd be saying it's a really good movie that just slightly misses great. But maybe even on a rewatch, it may get up there if I become more affectionate towards it. But that last, like, just... And it's not even... Mid-credits is even a bit weird to call it that, because it's like one credit and then something plays. Another credit, then something else plays. That does drag it down a whole point for me, because it just sours the ending so much. And because I feel like it made a great point, it had a satisfying conclusion, and I really don't see what the ending added to it. Other than potentially... if they wanted to like try and tease like a sequel. No, they've not made one, but maybe if they ever do one, this was what the purpose of this was. I just don't think it's needed, and it kind of sours the ending. So
yeah, fair enough.
6.5, and that is The Call. So hopefully you enjoyed our thoughts on such a thing. So next episode is Christmas Eve.
Oh God, it is.
We're giving them a treat for Christmas Eve, aren't we, David?
Giving them a treat? Yes. But in order to do so, we must consume poison.
Yes, like getting sand down your underwear. It's coarse.
It's rough and irritating.
Yeah.
It gets everywhere.
So yes, next episode for Christmas, we will be looking at the next episode in the Star Wars prequels. That is Attack of the Clones. So look forward to that. If you enjoyed our misery during the Phantom Menace review, I'm sure you'll get something out of this one. So
see, that's the thing. I remember growing up, like Phantom Menace, I was too young to recognize how bad it was. I was just like, oh yeah, everything's cool. Attack of the Clones is where I was just old enough to be like, wait a minute, I'm not sure I like this.
Hey, 3 years is a big difference at that age. You go through a lot in 3 years. Yep. We got some angry comments on the last one, saying, "Oh, these are just two pathetic nerds who are still angry 30 years." And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm not a Star Wars guy. I've never been a Star Wars guy.
I mean, neither am I, really.
I'm an angry nerd. I'll give you that. But like, I'm not. This is not some. Star Wars is so precious. Like, trust me.
I was gonna say, how much by volume is Star Trek on your TV channel? It's got to be like at least 20%.
Sure, yeah. A lot more Star Trek for sure.
I'm just saying, there's not a lot of overlap between Trekkies and Star Wars fans. I feel like it's pretty obvious which side you're on.
I mean, yeah, I guess. I don't know. I don't think of it in such childish, like.
Oh, well, of course it's not a binary, but this is the internet, Pete. Everything's a binary.
Yeah, but it's like, oh, they don't like the shitty movie I like. I must somehow diminish their opinion by saying they're just a part of this dumb camp and then leaving it at that. Like, that's literally all this is.
On the internet, you only need to say one thing. Never need to follow up.
Yep. So, yeah, Attack of the Clones next week. Look forward to that, everyone. Fun. Of course, David will do his homework movie in a second, but let me just tell you about patreon.com/MailFuzzTV if you want to support the show and all the other shows we have at MailFuzz Movies. You can get bonus content over there, including 2 monthly shows that me and David do. One is the Criterion Cut, where we review movies from the Criterion Collection, and the other is Extra Reels, where we review some of the worst things ever made, including films by Neil Breen, films starring Vanilla Ice, films...
You always go back to like Miami Connection, but the one that always sticks out to me is Mac and Me. That one still lives in my head right now.
Oh, Mac and Me's, yeah, that's a biggie. People have heard of that one. Yeah.
Troll 2.
Troll 2, yes. Things of that caliber. This month, we had a movie called Skyscraper starring Anna Nicole Smith, which was a Die Hard ripoff. Now, we've not recorded that yet at the time of recording this, but I assume it was awful.
I was going to say, I think we can play some pretty safe bets on that.
Yeah. I assume we'll give it a double D.
I think it already has some, Pete.
They're probably bigger than double D.
Yeah,
that was a joke about Anna Nicole Smith's boobage. Everyone.
High class here on Atomic Cinema Experiment.
Not when we're talking about Extra Reels movies. We're not.
Nah.
Everything goes out the window. Sanity is no longer there. All right. So every week, David goes back and watches a sci-fi movie that was on the show before he joined it, so he can catch up and be knowledgeable and all that stuff. David, what was your homework movie this week?
Well, we were doing an 80s countdown eventually, and I did still have one or two I wanted to kick off the list, and
eventually,
I decided
2 weeks from now, precisely.
As, happens. So one of the last ones I had was Videodrome, David Cronenberg. I didn't really know what a Videodrome was. I was always under the impression that it was just kind of a standard David Cronenberg film. Like, here's this creepy, horrifying thing humanity can barely understand, and then I'm going to make horrific puppets that give nightmares to anyone who watches them, and special effects and whatnot. Yeah, that's pretty much what I got. It's a horrifying TV signal, I think, was the gist of it. They stay very vague about what it does.
It's a rogue TV signal, yes. That's back in the analog days when you could hide things in the airwaves.
Exactly. And that's what I think is so interesting about the movie, though, is that it is so timeless in the idea of it's trying to condemn and also like talk about the idea of sex and violence on TV and in media in general, but it is also so specifically dated to when VHS tapes were everything. Like it's a strange dichotomy it had going on the whole way through. Overall, I'd say I enjoyed it. I don't think, I've been upfront. David Cronenberg films are not exactly my straight cup of tea. It's not something that I get a whole lot out of, but I did like the sort of commentary going through. And I think that Videodrome is the sort of thing that, if it hasn't already, has a very clear line to do a modern retelling with the internet age, because I don't think that the messages that it's talking about have gotten any less relevant.
Oh yeah, it would just be like a website in the dark web, like a dark version of YouTube somewhere. That's all it would be now.
Absolutely. And I think, I'm sure that video exists in 100 different ways. It's just not called Videodrome anymore. But no, overall, I think that there was some solid special effects work to this. It definitely did a good job of making a strangely horny TV. That wasn't something I expected, but boy, did they make it work. Everything else in there, I would say, is probably worth a 7.5 for me.
Okay. There you go. Yeah, Video Dream's pretty good.
Yep.
So that'll bring an end to the show, everyone. That's been the Atomic Cinema Experiment. And we will see you next time for Attack of the Clones. Hopefully you're having a nice Christmas period or whatnot. So yes, and also you can buy your friends a Patreon now. You can get a gift. You can gift patrons things. So, yeah.
That's right. Anybody who can provide photo proof of giving somebody a Patreon to someone else, we will shout you out on the show. We will give you props.
Sure. Yeah. I don't even think they have to give me photo proof. I'm pretty sure I'll know they've done it in the Patreon back end.
Will it give an alert if they say it's a gift?
I don't know. No one's done it yet. So I mean, but I'm assuming there'll be something saying, "Hey, someone bought a gift month for someone."
Yeah, possible. Yeah. Well, regardless, Merry Christmas to all, and to all, please comment, like, and subscribe.
Yes. Thank you for joining us, everyone. We'll see you guys next time. Keep watching science fiction and computer at Salsa.